hung like smoke. When power lives hidden in plain sight, who is really judging whom?